Hey everyone, just a quick warning here. This episode is about sex, so it's not for little ears. Hey all, welcome to Unscripted with Nell Daly. You're listening to episode 27. I'm your host, Nell Daly, psychotherapist, mental health journalist, TV commentator, and mother. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and survived all the relative holiday drama. Never easy. I'm actually recording this from London today. It's Monday, November 27th. And from across the pond, I'm doing a little work and a whole lot of pleasure, including, though, getting to know a few British podcasters and hosting an impromptu meetup with some amazing and funny unscripted fans. Needless to say, it's been an incredible long weekend here. And if you would like to follow my comings and goings, I would love it. Join me over on Instagram at Nell Daly or at Facebook at Nell Gibbon Daly and on Twitter at Nell NYC. We're building a very, very cool tribe where I give plenty of information on all aspects of human health, and I try to answer some of life's bigger spiritual questions too. Because for all of those who listen to me regularly, you guys all know I'm super spiritual. We're also looking to co-brand with new sponsors, especially online retailers. So if you're interested and feel like you're aligned with our show, feel free to email Michael at thedaly, that's THEDALY.com for more information. Unscripted is so excited to be sponsored by Elm, which is Essential Living magazine. The Elm publication provides cutting-edge, timely information on natural health, wellness, green living, nutrition, fitness, spirituality, and organic products, all local to the area where the magazine is produced. You can now license an Elm magazine in your own community, which will contain holistic content local to your area. Elm publishers are a unique group of people who are leading the conversation and changing the way people think about healthcare, wellness, green living, and organic products and foods. For more information, please contact Dr. Diane Hayden at diane@naturalnutmeg.com, or you can call them at 860-508-0894. In Connecticut, many of you might know them as the Natural Nutmeg. They are also published in Maine, and they are looking to partner with like-minded individuals all across the United States. Today's show is about sexual health and sex and relationships. I know this is a topic I keep coming back to because A, why not? And B, it's really important. And C, I like to do stories on things many people suffer with in silence so they know they aren't alone. The things we suffer with in silence are usually shame-based, and after doing this work for over a decade, many people feel shame around sex. Yes, even in 2017. Kerner, a psychologist who practices in New York City, over 10 years ago wrote a book called, listen to this, She Comes First, The Thinking Man's Guide to Pleasuring a Woman. And no shock here, it still tops the Amazon bestseller list. It's always caught my attention for all the obvious reasons when I've seen it at the Barnes & Noble. Hell yeah, I would usually say a little too loudly to no one in particular when I would pick it up off the shelf. So when I started Unscripted, he quickly made the bucket list. Here's the deal, guys. I see a ton of couples every month who are on the verge of breaking up because they're having problems in the bedroom. No shock there. Usually, their sex lives are messed up for a variety of reasons. I'm just going to put it bluntly. And by the time they get to me, there is little to no intimacy, and they aren't communicating about it, and they're exhausted, paralyzed, and most of the time ready to throw in the towel. What you're going to hear will change lives and restore hope if you're one of those couples today on Unscripted. Ian talks openly about sex and his own struggles to perform. He talks about erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation. He talks about the difference between outercourse and intercourse, and he explains the difference between spontaneous desire and something called responsive desire. Now, these were terms I didn't even know before we had our wonderful conversation. Ian, a former literature professor, you know what he does well? And I thought about this a lot. He gives us a new language around things that don't usually get talked about openly. There's such tremendous value in this. Once people have the language down, they can communicate. They can communicate about what's going on with them, both individually and within the paradigm of a couple. And then people can start to work on recapturing consistent quality sex. So, without further ado, Ian Kerner. So, Ian, thank you so much for coming on Unscripted today. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's great to be here now.
So, you wrote a book called She Comes First. And I just want to say props to you, and obviously you wrote it a while ago, but it was brave because psychotherapists aren't supposed to come out about this stuff on any sort of personal level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, 14 years later, the book is still a bestseller, and it's still a book that I love a lot. And I think, I think that there were really two components to it. One is which, I wanted to promote this idea of sexual cliteracy, and that so many people, men especially, are kind of ill-cliterate when it comes to really understanding female sexuality. But you're right, Nell. The other part of it was that I really made a very personal revelation about my own sexuality. And the first chapter was, the title was Confessions of a Premature Ejaculator. And that was very difficult to write. I think if I had been struggling with erectile disorder, it would have been much easier at the time because there were commercials everywhere for Viagra, Levitra, Cialis, and 24-hour erections. And, we've done a lot. A lot has happened to kind of medicalize many aspects of sexuality, much to my chagrin. But I really came out with an issue that's still very much in the closet and still very much a source of shame for many men and a source of distress for both them and their partners. And I think that confession and sort of looking at the world of sexuality, not just through the lens of sexual prowess, but sort of sexual healing, has maybe contributed to sort of the universal life of the book and its qualities.
So tell me it's incredible. Tell me what happened? Did you start in private practice? You didn't obviously go into private practice as a psychotherapist and think, I'm going to write a book on premature ejaculation. Right. So did you start seeing this problem showing up in your office and it really resonated with you?
Actually, I started off, I wasn't doing anything related to psychotherapy in the beginning. I mean, I was an English major and a literature professor at NYU, and I became very interested in sexuality and sex education, really centering around my own struggles and building my own therapeutic alliances as a patient. And my first path was actually to become certified as a sexuality counselor and to begin working with patients around sexuality. So that has always been my specialization and my passion. And then, soon thereafter, I, went back to school and became licensed as a marriage and family therapist and, broadened my understanding of human psychology and couples from there. But I would say that sexuality has always been the area that I was passionate about.
So can you tell the listeners a little bit about what the major premise of the book is?
Well, I think the major premise of She Comes First, and this is something that I see universally, with my couples, is that I think that all of us who are coupled, whether we are heterosexual or gay male, are kind of crippled by what I call the intercourse discourse, which is feeling just that, intercourse is the main way of creating sexual pleasure, the primary way of creating sexual pleasure. And, we know from studies that 80% of women do not achieve orgasm consistently from intercourse alone. And so a lot of women over the years continue to come into my practice really feeling very sexually unsatisfied, untended to, neglected by their partners. Many men come in also, especially lately, younger men with crippling erectile disorder. Young men in their mid-20s very often, and they're coming in with erectile disorder, and very often they don't lose their erections until they transition into intercourse. And so really this one sexual behavior, intercourse, when we think about sexuality, yes, it's procreative, and it would be nice to have intercourse when we're procreating and not have to resort to IVF, but there are so many other dimensions to sexuality. There's the relational dimension, the recreational dimension, the spiritual dimension. And so to have so much just wrapped up in a single sexual behavior that is not even the behavior that's most likely to consistently lead to mutual pleasure, I think is very debilitating for us as a society. And so She Comes First was in some ways really about getting out from under the shadow of intercourse and embracing other ways to pleasure based on a more realistic version of female sexuality than the one that many men and many women are spoon-fed. So in short, I would say She Comes First is sort of about privileging outer course over intercourse.
It's so beautifully said. This just cracked open. We could talk for hours about this. I'm going to try to focus us. But could you tell me, why do you think so many men, are you seeing more men coming in with this issue of losing their erection now more than ever? Or do you think that people are just willing to are willing to talk about it more than they ever have before?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. It's interesting in therapy because you're only seeing the people who, have problems. So you don't want to generalize that out to the world because you're seeing people who have really specific struggles. And so, I think for a long time, erectile disorder was, an issue that you would deal with sometimes situationally, but it was largely older men who were going through life cycle transitions that were natural to the life cycle in terms of their own erections and libidos. So I have seen a rise in young men in their 20s and 30s presenting with erectile disorder. And I've seen more of that in the last year or two than I've ever seen in my practice. So I don't know for sure if there are, new sort of systemic contextual factors affecting these men as they are out there dating, relating, and mating, or as you said, if this is sort of a generation that was sort of grew up in the era of Viagra commercials and Cialis commercials and grew up. When I was growing up, there was no Men's Health magazine or Women's Health magazine with a sexual health column every week. So, perhaps these are just men who feel more comfortable and feel that talking about sex with a professional is less of a taboo and less shameful than it might have meant in the past.
Mm-hmm. What I found in my practice, not only I agree with you, more men coming in, and when I do the podcast on anything on sex and intimacy and relationships, I get a ton of questions from men, more so than women, about these issues that you're bringing up. But I also have seen an increase of women kind of raising their hand and saying in their marriages, I'm not sexually satisfied and I need it to shift. I need the paradigm to change. I need him to figure it out. I need him to go for therapy because I don't want to stay married if this is a non-negotiable if we can't get this right. So your suggestion then to people, generally it sounds like falls along the lines of intercourse doesn't have to be the end game.
Well, it depends the issue that we're talking about. Like, for many couples, they're able to have sex quite well, and they are really able to, find a fit on so many different dimensions, physically, psychological, spiritually, but they're having a hard time with desire. So for some couples, from actually the vast majority of couples that I work with, it's not often a question about the quality of sex. It's really about the frequency of sex and that they're no longer having sex. And certainly, just as I've seen a rise in young men complaining of erectile disorder, I've seen a huge boom and rise in women initiating therapy because they are the higher desire partner and their boyfriend or their spouse is not. And that's certainly a big reversal as well. But that's, again, not so much about, sometimes it's about both the frequency of the sex and the quality of sex, but sometimes it's really just more about a desire issue and why are we not having sex more regularly and consistently. And there have been, studies that have shown that couples who even have sex once a week, just once a week, which for some couples is a lot, for some couples not much at all. But once a week, couples who have that sex once a week have experienced much higher levels of relational satisfaction than couples who have sex less than once a week. And the couples who have sex more than once a week, like 2, 3, 4, or 5 times a week, don't necessarily get an extra boost in relational satisfaction. So it's sort of about like not being able to even sort of have just a minimum foundational level of sexual frequency.
Okay, so this is, again, touching on a huge topic in my office. So I have many couples, I've been doing this for over a decade, who come in, or individuals who come in, and they're not really having sex in their marriages, especially after kids, and it's become a real issue. And it always sort of throws me back on my heels when I hear the numbers. I'll even say to people, have you had sex this year? And sometimes they say maybe once, maybe not at all in a year. Yeah. And I think that would surprise a lot of people because I don't think we talk about it a lot outside of a therapeutic environment. Guys aren't sort of, toasting each other after golf saying, God, I haven't gotten laid in 2 years by my wife, right? No one's coming out about it. So do you have any thoughts after doing this for as long as you have and having endless conversations on this topic, why desire wanes in a long-term assuming monogamous relationship?
Yeah.
And then can you give the listeners a couple of ways off the top of your head how we reignite that passion?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing I think is that, many couples are used to an experience of desire being kind of spontaneous, that, men should be walking hard-ons and kind of get turned on immediately, and all you have to do is sort of hop out of the shower and towel off, and you're going to have a guy who's raring to go. And I think a lot of men actually can remember not so far in the distance past when it seemed like, their partners were also initiating and interested in sex, and that you couldn't wait to get home and make love to your partner. And so I think for most of us, we sort of feel that like sex is just something that happens. Sexual desire is just a function of chemistry, and it's somewhat spontaneous. And, we live in a world where we have to plan out so many other things, or forecast and, plan out. And sex is something like, hey, like we just should be able to look at each other and get going. But, studies have really shown that in long-term relationships, certainly for women and also for men, that desire ceases to be spontaneous and becomes responsive. So it's a difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire. And what does that mean? It means that desire responds to something that comes before it. And that in itself is a radical notion, because so many people just think of desire as the starting point for having sex. I mean, I work with so many couples, and this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but not really. And they'll say, oh, I'm sitting at the dinner table and we're having a nice dinner. And I'll say to my partner, honey, would you like to have, by chance, should we have sex tonight? No, I don't think so. I'm not really in the mood. And fine, that makes perfect sense. And neither partner is experiencing desire in that moment, and so sex is off the table. But if you look at the model of responsive desire, that says that something needs to become first in order for desire to emerge. And that something is actually the experience of arousal, or subjective arousal in clinical terms, meaning the feeling of arousal and your own experience of it. And that comes through creating connection through touch, through pleasure, with stimulating each other's brains. But if you aren't engaged in that period of arousal generation, which could be, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even 20 minutes, it's really possible that desire will not emerge at all. And this is especially tricky because, certainly for men can be experiencing men can be experiencing responsive desire in their relationships, but spontaneous desire out in the world. And the same is true for women. So you could go to work and flirt with somebody and have like a sexual pang and feel something, and that makes sense. That's spontaneous desire. If I weren't married, I'd really go for this. And, we feel it in our bodies, and then you come home and you're in a responsive desire relationship. So I think it's about really getting used to a new paradigm of desire, being responsive desire, and learning how to stimulate responsive desire, how to plan for it, how to integrate it into your environment. And I have been very successful in moving couples from a spontaneous desire model to a responsive desire model, and helping them, recapture consistent quality sex in their lives and in their relationships.
And Ian, what are some of the practical tips? Could you give us 3 practical tips that you teach your patients to go into that responsive model?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is, if you're not showing up with desire for sex in a responsive desire model, what are you showing up with? Well, you might need to show up with willingness, the willingness to generate the arousal or the connection that will lead to the desire. So I have an exercise that I call a willingness window, and usually I will say to a couple, let's test this idea of responsive desire and see if you fall into the responsive desire paradigm. So I have this willingness window exercise. I want you to 20 minutes, once or twice a week, to just carve out this time. This isn't about having sex. This is just about seeing if desire will emerge. And in fact, if you're anxious that this is going to lead to sex, then let's have a clear rule and say no sex. And some couples really like that and get comfort in that, because the sex itself is somewhat fraught, and maybe that's due to the quality of the sex. So, okay, so we're just testing responsive desire. And I want you to pick an activity that isn't just like cuddling or non-sexual physical connection. I want you to pick an activity that's actually kind of pleasurable and arousal generating, and I want you to do that activity for 15 or 20 minutes, and let's see what happens, and let's see if responsive desire emerges. And so then couples will say, well, what kind of activity? What should we do in there? And I'll say, okay, well, let's pick an activity let's do this twice a week, 15 or 20 minutes. Let's make one of those activities physical, and let's make the other activity psychological. So the physical one is kind of easy. What do you like that gives you pleasure? And couples will say, I really miss making out. There was a time where we used to kiss and play with our tongues and explore above the waist and rub up against each other, and like we weren't having sex, but there was just so much making out and so much connection. Some couples will say, like we used to take sexy showers together. They didn't always lead to sex, but like we really, would soap each other up and have fun in there. And, it's not hard to work with a couple to find a non-genitally based, or even it can be a little genitally based, just not genitally focused activity that they both enjoy together. And so they commit to doing that. And then I say, okay, but sex is more than just physically being turned on. We know that, women can sometimes fantasize themselves very close to orgasms, and men can, see somebody sexy or have a sexy thought or watch something sexy and get full erection. So what are you going to do to stimulate your minds? And that's often where couples are experiencing the greatest deficit in their sex lives, is they only know how to be physical with each other. And at most, they're maybe verbalizing through groaning or grunting a little bit of what they're experiencing, but they don't have they haven't established any kind of language to create psychological arousal with each other. So when I ask them to pick a psychological activity, 90% of them are totally stupefied,
Yes. Yeah, right. They don't, because we don't teach people this, right? And
that's right.
This is not something that mom and dad sit you down and teach you how to be a good lover, to communicate what you need in terms of getting erotic desire going.
Exactly.
So what do you say? This is awesome.
Well, certainly it could be, sharing a fantasy, doing some kind of little sexy role playing. But most couples will be like, oh, no. I would never sit across from this person who I'm sharing my life with in every other way and actually share a fantasy, because that would be really vulnerable. So people usually can't handle face-to-face erotic communication in that way. But what they can handle is some sort of side-by-side erotic communication. So we'll talk about reading erotica together. I really am a huge champion of ethical porn, which is a new kind of trend in porn, which is often made by women, written by women, directed by women, with the aim of appealing to both women and couples. And it's ethical because the actors want to be there. The actors have a say and consent in what's happening. There's supervision. People are being paid. All the conditions of a humane workplace are being met. It's truthful. It can still be very fantastical and imaginary or kinky. Different body types, more ethnic diversity. And usually you have to pay a little something for it. It's not particularly expensive. So that'll really perk many couples up. And it's interesting because it's often the women who are much more open, eager, and adventurous about watching ethical porn than the men.
Why do you think? Why do you think that?
I think the men have more experience watching porn to masturbate and get off, and so it's coupled with the shame around their own masturbatory experiences and having to hide masturbation and feeling conflicted over masturbation and it being a solo act. And I think women get it more as just something that can be enjoyed together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Do you do you feel, just to go back a little bit to the title of your book, She Comes First. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're bringing up here is sort of the identity, or the fragility around identity and sexuality, the male ego. I talk a lot about that in my office because so many women say, I don't even know how to start talking to him about the fact that I am not satisfied in bed, or that he thinks that the only way I should get off is through intercourse. That men become incredibly emotionally invested in getting her off through penetration. Right. And with him penetrating her, not even sex toys, that there's something very. Can you speak a little bit about this and sort of take the veil off of that a little bit?
What is the exact question?
That I just find that what is up with the fact that is it? I guess what I'm trying to say is it society that has convinced men and everything that they watch in terms of porn that the way to get a girl off and that their ego is wrapped up into the way of getting a girl off.
A lot of women are perpetuating this, and that a lot of women aren't sharing with men. A lot of men I meet have a genuine curiosity and inquisitiveness about what turns their partner on, and they're not always getting accurate or truthful or any responses. I also meet with a lot of men who are desperate to break out of the intercourse discourse and really want to pleasure their partners manually, orally, or sometimes even incorporate sex toys, and they often are met with a lot of discomfort. A lot of women think, I think a lot of women think like if he's going down on me or if he's stimulating me, he's bored. It's going to be boring, or is he going to lose his erection, or, really, what do I look like down there? What do I smell like or taste like? Or I don't think that that's my most beautiful or attractive part of my body. I'm not saying this across the board.
No,
I'm just saying
that
I don't want to put men in the box of just sort of not caring about satisfying their partners. I think it's really more of a communication issue. And I think that,
and I think what you're saying also is an educational issue.
And an educational
because I think that so many women get into relationships in their late teenage years or early adulthood, and then through their 20s, and they don't speak up. They don't use their voice about what's pleasurable and what's not pleasurable, or what they need to get off, because they're afraid if they say something, they won't be loved.
Yeah.
Which is why we're always afraid to say anything. We're afraid we're going to be left.
Right, man. That's totally right. I mean, I work with so many couples, and sometimes they come in and there's a lot of anger and frustration around sex. And, maybe the woman, hasn't been sharing for the last 3 to 5 years that sex hasn't been working. And she's been, dealing with a lot of silent desperation and a lot of resentment and a lot of anger. And the guy is honestly just sort of not clued into that. He's sort of been dissociating from that reality, or working to convince himself otherwise, or not intuiting or looking at or experiencing what was right in front of him. So I think a lot of couples work together to kind of dissociate and disconnect from really difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to one of the questions I'm asked the most when it comes to sex. If you haven't been talking to your partner about the lack of what's going on, your needs not getting met, how do you even start the conversation? I hear this all the time. I don't want to have the conversation, and this comes from men or women, because I don't want to hurt her feelings. I don't want to hurt his feelings. I've been faking it for so long. I don't even know how now to tell him that for 10 years I've actually needed to touch myself while we're having sex.
I know, it's so hard, and if you think about it, most of these conversations that we have about any difficult topics tend to trigger our defensive postures or our protective postures. So it's very easy to escalate into an argument, into a series of defenses, and really what's getting left behind is the core vulnerability of feeling neglected or not being recognized or tuned with or wanting a deeper connection. So it's really hard to get to that vulnerability and to not trigger defenses. I mean, I think personally, and this is just my philosophy, is that one of the remarkable things about talking about sex over any kind of other kind of conversation, maybe except food, is that talking about sex can actually get you turned on and interested in it. The language of sex, the poetry of sex, actually has a physiological effect. You can measure and see arousal and response when couples are trying to turn each other on. And so rather, sometimes what I like to say to somebody, let's just say a woman came in and she was on her own and her partner wasn't there and she felt like this was her thing to work on, or she'd never get her partner in, and give me some advice. One thing that I would really get her to do is to really articulate the problem in a very deep way. And I'd try and explore it through many different lenses, but I'd really want her to thicken her understanding of the problem and why it may be occurring and why it continues to repeat itself. So I'd really want to thicken that narrative. And then I would really ask her, if we were to work together, or if in the course of just a few months, or maybe even less than a few months, maybe in the course of 1 month, if this problem were actually able to get better and somehow you were able to be on the other side of it, what would it look like? What would the sex look like that you were having? And then I will ask them to develop that picture and to thicken that narrative of actually the sex that they would like to be having. And I'll usually use questions and language that will get them to talk about the experience in their own body that they want to have, or to engage the language of fantasy. And then I'll really encourage them to write that out in their own words, as a real sexual fantasy, and then to try expressing that to their partner. So instead of coming to their partner with just a very narrow view of the problem, really coming to their partner not only with a wider view of the problem and a real understanding of the sex that would be the solution, but a language that could actually involve the partner, engage the partner, and arouse the partner.
I see. So just to break that down a little bit, so it sounds like what you help a person get to is not to just approach the partner with a list of complaints about what's deficient or wrong with the sex.
Right. So to be able to say, I went to this session and man, I actually kind of I went to the session and I was thinking about it, and coming home to, I started to get a little turned on because I really have a kind of a desire or a fantasy about the kind of sex we could be having and what it could look like. And hopefully there's a partner there who can say, oh, well, do tell me a bit more about this. And then, you're engaging your partner in something arousing that they're really a part of. And if I have both partners in the room in a session, I'll do it in the room just to make sure it really happens.
I think that what you're speaking to as well there is that there's so much shame, and this is another one I get a lot. I get a lot of questions into my inbox about this one. People have so much shame about expressing their fantasies to their partners.
Yeah.
That they're having them. It's not that that they necessarily want to be living in a sexless marriage. They're just too ashamed to tell their partner what's actually going on in their mind, what their longings are, what their desires are.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, sometimes we pathologize our own fantasies, or we worry that we're going to be judged for them, or that they're too weird or too kinky. In some ways, I think in other cases, like I know for me with premature ejaculation, or for men with erectile disorder, you're working your hardest to avoid the issue or hide the issue, or just come up with some kind of sex script that works. At times you're blaming your partner if you're really immature and can't handle the shame of it. You're saying, oh, this has never happened before. And so what does that tell your partner? Wow, I guess it's you. I guess it's me. So I don't think we've ever been modeled to have these conversations. I think many of us didn't grow up in anything close to resembling a sex positive home. So I think that nor was our education particularly positive. So I think that there's, a lot of different reasons. So
is there some of your best advice, going back to any kind of dysfunction that men are going through, or premature ejaculation, is your best advice to definitely talk about the problem with your spouse, with your partner?
Sure.
And then you have a lot of hope for people that they can work on this and get through it together.
Absolutely. Because
I think a lot of people feel very, very hopeless about it, that it's either Viagra or we have to break up, or I should be alone because I can't handle this, or I don't think someone's going to love me through it.
Yeah.
Especially as I think people age.
Yeah, and I often have people who come in who are in relationships and they've been married for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years plus, and they're exclusively monogamous, but they don't want to bring their partner in. They feel like it's their issue. It's my erectile disorder. It's my premature ejaculation. I need to fix it. It's my problem. It's not my partner's burden to deal with this. But, your sex life is something that's shared with this one person. They occupy the bedroom with you. They are as much a participant, an actor, a player in this as you are. And so I think that the real work, so much better work can happen when both partners are willing to show up and talk about it, let their experiences be heard. It's so important to be able to mentalize what your partner is experiencing when it comes to sex, So if your male partner has erectile disorder, to really be able to walk around his mind in 360 degrees in a three-dimensional way and know what's going on. And for that same guy to be able to do that with his partner, to know what her experience is. And that sort of shared intersubjective space, to use a little more clinical language, is really at the heart of creating the attachment that can create the resources for solving the problem.
Which is what you're talking about, is intimacy. That's the real work of having an intimate relationship.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, and that's a good, be a long definition of intimacy, but I guess a good one.
It's beautiful, absolutely exquisite. So I have two more questions for you before we end. One is, so in the book, did she come first?
Did she come first? Or
does she?
You mean in my own marriage?
No. I mean, in the book, in the prescription in the book, for those of us who haven't read the book.
Yeah.
Does she come first? Is that? I'm sure you were asked this question many times before.
Yes. I mean, does she come first? Well, I mean, I think that simultaneous orgasms, parallel orgasms, are pretty difficult to consistently achieve. It would require a lot of timing and synchronicity. And so I think we should sort of get out of this mindset of thinking, I mean, man, if you say to yourself, not only do I have to have a simultaneous orgasm, it has to be accomplished via intercourse. I mean, I'd rather go buy a lottery ticket.
But what do you mean? Because that's what we see in the movies all the time.
I know, but look, it's just not.
And not necessarily in porn. That's not always what we see in porn, which is interesting. But it's definitely what we see in all the romantic movies, right? There's this this powerful moment where they both orgasm.
Right. And so then I would say, well, women, and this has been shown that women have an innate capacity to not just have one orgasm, but to potentially have 2 or 3 orgasms during a single session of sex. And that has a lot to do with some small differences in male and female sexual physiology. And, for many women, the process of arousal can also take a little longer than it does for men. And so, knowing that your partner has this, that A, might not be able to orgasm before you ejaculate, and has an innate capacity to maybe go on to have more orgasms, I think the philosophy of she comes first and sort of ensuring that your partner has had an orgasm before you've had an orgasm. It doesn't have to be through intercourse. It's really through outercourse, through whatever combination of behaviors work for you. I think that that's a healthy way of experiencing sexuality, and also managing your own anxiety for men around sex, because a lot of men worry. A lot of men worry that part of the reason they're getting erectile disorder or prematurely ejaculating in the first place is because they're so anxious about their partner's experience of pleasure.
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, she does come first, and she comes first, and that also means privileging and respecting female sexuality in ways that men aren't always raised to do. I mean, look around us at all of the women who are coming out with these horrible experiences of sexual harassment and trauma, and just feeling, completely objectified by men. I think, and she comes first. There could still be a tendency or an ability to objectify, but I think you are much more experiencing and embracing the personhood and subjectivity of your partner.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you're really speaking to, for me, I see so many young women between the ages of 18 and, let's say, 25 to 30, and they've always sort of been my wheelhouse as a patient, that millennial crowd. And what's really interesting is how many college students come in, how many women come in, and they'll remark if they had a sexual experience with a man where he actually got her off. Like that will be something remarkable. Like he got me off, or, he came and then he made sure that he wasn't going to leave the bed until I came, or he made me
Yeah.
come before he came. And they actually remark about it because what their experience is generally is that doesn't happen for them. That there's this sort of really uncomfortable silence in the bedroom between young people, that just, if we have intercourse and then guys don't really know what to do anyway, so I'll just won't say anything and the guy won't push it, he'll come, and then that's sex. And I think it also speaks to the fact that we don't teach women as young girls or young women to masturbate. So I have a lot of women in my office who don't even know how to have an orgasm, and then you throw on top of that some birth control pills, and then many of them are on antidepressants, that they're having sexual dysfunction anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have a closet full of sex toys that were, they're new, they're in boxes, they're often given to me by companies, and I really do encourage. I don't think that masturbation, with all of the hysteria around sex addiction and porn addiction, we really can demonize masturbation as taking away from relational sex. But I think that self-pleasure and relational pleasure really coexist together. And I think if you're not achieving orgasms with your partner, especially if you're, a woman, one place to really start is getting comfortable in your own body and being able to pleasure yourself and knowing how to do that, and then being able to replicate that and communicate that to your partner.
So one last question that I have for you is, on this show, I talk a lot about on the news, the transgender community, the new paradigms of relationships in terms of polyamorousness and open relationships that are happening. There's been a lot of articles in the New York Times and other places where people are really starting to talk about this. Have you seen an increase in that in your practice, or a conversation, at least an increase in the conversations around sort of how fluid human sexuality is, people exploring more their own sexes, even though they might consider themselves heterosexual, but they want to have experiences that would be considered traditionally bisexual or gay, and being more open to the idea of staying in partnerships, in marriages, but being able to explore sexually outside of the relationships to keep the marriage going if the sex isn't totally satisfying inside the marriage?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all of that. I see a lot more experiences of gender fluidity, or people who don't feel they neatly fit into the box of male and female, and they might not fit neatly into the box of trans male or trans female, but there is something around gender expression and gender experience that they want to explore the subtleties and nuances of. So I see a lot more of that. I certainly see more sexual fluidity in terms of people being able to embrace the idea of having a more multidimensional orientation and not exclusively being attracted to one gender over the other, but maybe also having themes that really create attraction for themselves. And so people being able to say, for example, well, I'm kind of kink-oriented, and it doesn't always matter who I'm playing with, male or female. The thing that I'm really interested in lately is the power dimension. So I'm certainly experiencing more sexual fluidity. And yes, I'm finding many more couples who set out to be in exclusively monogamous relationships are starting to question whether or not monogamy can satisfy each of their individual needs, and are looking at either some form of sexual adventurousness or some form of an open marriage and consensual non-monogamy. I think that's all out there. I think the devil is sort of in the details. So, I have I have a few couples that have been exploring consensual non-monogamy. And
can you explain for a lot of people who don't know what that means, what that phrase is?
It's just, it just means embracing non-monogamy in some way. So being able to have other sexual partners, maybe being able to play together with others, or even engaging in relationships like polyamory. So consensual non-monogamy would just be the broad umbrella that would encompass, swinging and shared sexual adventurousness, sort of having, date, side dates that your partner knows about, or even being able to engage in relationships with other people in which your partner may be your primary partner, but you have secondary partners. The thing is, the details of working it out can be complicated. Like I work with couples where they're both signed on for some consensual non-monogamy, but one partner is much more successful at it. And so one partner has way more play partners than the other partner. And suddenly it doesn't seem so fair, even though in principle that it is, but in practice it doesn't feel so fair. So, there's a lot to navigate, and it takes a lot of resilience to be able to have come from a model of monogamy and to move to consensual non-monogamy. But I see a lot of couples doing it.
That might be your next book.
I don't think I'm going to write another book for a while now. I'm a little burnt out on the writing. I'll leave that to you and the younger generation.
Oh, well, you are gold. It was such a pleasure. I could have you on all day. Man, this is amazing. We got some serious work done here, and I really appreciate you being on Unscripted today. And if people want to find you, they want to find more of you, I know you have an amazing blog that you do, that you've worked on. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I have my website, iankerner.com, and then there's also another website called goodinbed.com where I bring together a lot of other sex and relationship experts who blog and tweet and write ebooks. So that's goodinbed.com. And then, of course, there's still She Comes First, getting the message out.
It's the best. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to Unscripted with Nell Daly. Again, please come over and join us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You'll find plenty of information on sexual health and sex and intimacy and relationships on all of our social media platforms. And we're always looking for feedback. So send any questions or comments, especially about today's show, because I know you guys have them, to Michael@the or you can send them along to me. I'm still trying to read all the emails that come in, and that's THEDALY.com. We'll both hook you up. As always, my friends, may the light in me shine to the light in you. Namaste.